In 1914, quarry workers in western Germany were cutting into a slope of basalt when they broke through into a grave. Inside were two people, a man of about 40, a woman of about 25. They had been buried together carefully and covered in red ochre powder around 14,200 years ago. And buried with them, deliberately placed, were the bones of a dog. For decades, nobody paid much attention to those bones. Then researchers went back and examined the dog's teeth properly, and they found something that changes the entire story. That dog had been sick. Not once, 3 separate times as a puppy, it had suffered severe canine distemper. You can read it in the enamel of its teeth, in the growth lines that stop and start again. Distemper in a young dog is brutal. Fever, vomiting, diarrhea, seizures. Without intensive care, most puppies simply die. And that means for weeks, probably many weeks, somebody kept that animal warm, gave it water, cleaned up after it, and fed it by hand while it could do absolutely nothing in return. It couldn't hunt. It couldn't guard. It couldn't work. It was a sick animal in a world where humans were fighting for every calorie they could find. They kept it anyway. And when they died, they took it with them. So here is the question. 14,000 years before that grave, the ancestors of that dog were wolves, the single most dangerous land predator in Europe, an animal that competed with humans for exactly the same food and would kill a person given the chance. How did that animal end up buried in a human grave, cared for like a child? The answer is not the story you were told. Let's start with why this should never have happened at all. For most of human history, wolves were not our friends. They were our direct competitors. Wolves hunted deer, elk, horse, bison, so did we. Wolves ranged across the same territory. Wolves followed the same herds. Every wolf pack in your valley was eating food that could have been yours. And they were dangerous. A gray wolf can weigh 60 kilos. Its bite pressure is roughly twice a large dog's. They hunt in coordinated groups, they run down prey over distance, and they are intelligent enough to test a target before committing. So the first thing you have to understand is that this was not a case of humans finding a friendly animal in the woods. This was the two top predators of the northern hemisphere, living in the same space and wanting the same meat. Now, the story most people have heard goes like this. Some clever ancient human found a litter of wolf cubs, took them back to camp, raised them by hand, and tamed them. Over generations, those tame wolves became dogs. It's a nice story. It's almost certainly wrong. We know it's wrong because people have actually tried it. In modern times, researchers and wildlife centers have hand-raised wolf pups from days old, bottle-fed, socialized constantly, treated exactly like puppies. And what you get at the end is not a dog. You get a wolf that is comfortable around humans. They still won't reliably obey. They still resource guard aggressively. At sexual maturity, around 2 years old, many of them become genuinely dangerous to their handlers. They test dominance. They bite. Facilities that raise wolves need reinforced enclosures and trained staff, and even then they treat every adult wolf as an animal that could seriously hurt someone. Taming an individual animal and domesticating a species are completely different things. Taming lasts one lifetime and dies with that animal. Domestication is a change in the genome itself. So if ancient humans didn't sit down and decide to make dogs, and they almost certainly didn't, because nobody knew what a dog was to aim for, then what actually happened? The answer is that the wolves did it to themselves. Here's the mechanism. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. When humans set up camp, we make garbage. We always have. Bones with marrow still inside, scraps of hide, guts and offal we don't want, ash pits with burnt fat in them. A human camp is, from an animal's point of view, a free pile of high-calorie food that regenerates every few days. The problem is that to eat from that pile, you have to get close to humans. And humans throw rocks and spears. Now, wolves are not all identical. In any wolf population, there's natural variation in a trait biologists call flight distance. How close a predator will let a threat get before it runs. Most wolves have a long flight distance. They see a human at 200 meters and they're gone. But a few, at the far end of the curve, are bolder. Not aggressive, that gets you killed, just less afraid. They'll creep in at the edge of the firelight at night and take the bones. Those wolves ate better. In a hard winter, a wolf with reliable access to a human refuse pile survives when the wolves out in the forest starve. Surviving wolves breed, and flight distance is heritable. A nervous wolf tends to have nervous pups. A calm wolf tends to have calm pups. So generation after generation, the calmer end of the population got fed, and the fearful end didn't. Nobody selected anything. No human made a decision. The camp was simply a filter, and it filtered for tameness. Over enough generations, you don't have wolves hanging around a camp anymore. You have a population of animals that lives alongside humans, tolerates humans, and is genetically different from the wolves in the forest. That's the beginning of a dog. Now, that's a nice theory. Here's the part where somebody tested it, accidentally, on the other side of the world, on foxes. In 1959, a Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev started an experiment at a fur farm in Novosibirsk, Siberia. He was working with silver foxes, a wild animal, farmed for pelts, and thoroughly unfriendly. Handling one meant thick gloves, because they bite. Belyaev wanted to test a single idea. He suspected that all the strange traits we see in domestic animals weren't separately bred for. He thought they came as a package, dragged along by selecting for one thing only, tameness. So he set up the simplest possible test. Each generation, a handler would approach a fox and offer a hand. The foxes that were least aggressive and least fearful, just the calmest 10% or so, were allowed to breed. That was it. That was the only criterion. Not size, not coat, not ear shape, not intelligence. Only how the animal reacted to a person. Within about 10 generations, the foxes started to change. And not just in temperament. Their ears began to droop. Instead of standing up, their tails started to curl over their backs. White patches appeared on their faces and chests, in the same places you see white markings on dogs and cows and horses. Their snouts got shorter and their skulls broader. Their breeding seasons stretched out. Their skeletons became more juvenile in shape. And their behavior changed in ways nobody had selected for either. They whined for attention. They licked hands. They wagged their tails when a person came near. They responded to their names. Belyaev had bred for one thing, calmness around humans, and he got the entire domestic animal package for free. Floppy ears, curly tail, patchy coat, puppy face, affection. This is now called domestication syndrome, and it shows up across an astonishing range of species. Dogs, pigs, cattle, horses, goats, rabbits, all of them show some version of the same cluster. Why would tameness be genetically welded to ear cartilage and coat color? The leading explanation involves a group of cells in the developing embryo called neural crest cells. These cells form very early and then migrate through the body, and they end up building a strangely diverse list of things. Parts of the adrenal glands, pigment cells, cartilage in the ears and snout, parts of the jaw and teeth. Select for animals with a milder fear response, and you're effectively selecting for slightly smaller or slower developing adrenal glands. But because those cells are the same population that builds cartilage and pigment, you get less pigment in patches, softer ear cartilage, and a shorter snout riding along with it. Tame and cute are the same mutation. You cannot get one without the other, which means the wolves at the edge of the firelight weren't just becoming calmer, they were becoming rounder, softer, and more appealing to look at, purely as a side effect, and that mattered more than anyone expected. Because the next thing that changed was the mind. In the late 1990s, a researcher named Brian Hare ran a test that seems almost too simple to be meaningful. He put a piece of food under one of two cups, so the animal couldn't see which. Then a human pointed at the correct cup. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, animals that outperform us on some memory tasks, mostly failed. They didn't understand that the point was information meant for them. Dogs got it immediately, puppies got it, before they'd had much training at all. And wolves, even wolves raised by humans, performed far worse than dogs. Somewhere in becoming dogs, these animals developed something wolves don't have: the ability to read a human as a source of information, and to look at our faces to find out what we mean. Then, in 2015, a team in Japan led by Takefumi Nagasawa found the mechanism underneath it. They measured oxytocin, the hormone involved in bonding between mothers and infants, in dogs and their owners, before and after a period of interaction. When a dog and its owner looked into each other's eyes, oxytocin rose in both of them. The dog's rising made the humans rise, which made the human engage more, which made the dogs rise again. It's a feedback loop. It's the same loop that runs between a parent and a baby. They ran the same test on hand-raised wolves. The wolves barely made eye contact at all, and the loop didn't happen. Dogs had hijacked the bonding circuit we use for our own children, not through training, through evolution. And then, in 2019, a team led by Kaminski found the strangest piece of all. They dissected the facial muscles of dogs and wolves and compared them. Dogs have a small muscle above the eye called the levator anguli oculi medialis. It pulls the inner corner of the eyebrow upward, making the eyes look larger and rounder, and producing an expression humans instinctively read as sadness or need. Wolves don't have it. In wolves, it's barely there, a scattering of fibers, not functioning muscle. Dogs evolved a muscle, in the space of a few tens of thousands of years, whose only real function is to make a face that humans cannot ignore. Puppy dog eyes are not a metaphor. They're anatomy. And they exist because, for thousands of years, the dogs that could make that face got fed. We were the selection pressure, and we didn't know we were doing it. Now go back to that grave in Germany. 14,200 years ago, a puppy in someone's camp got sick. Its temperature spiked. It stopped eating. It probably had seizures. An animal in that condition, in the Paleolithic, is worthless by any practical measure. It can't guard. It can't hunt. It fouls the shelter. It eats food and water that a person could have used, and it will very likely die anyway. Somebody sat with it. Somebody kept it warm and got liquid into it and cleaned it, and did that again the next day and the day after, through 3 separate rounds of the illness. They did not do that because the dog was useful. There was no useful. They did it because at some point in the previous 10,000 years, the animal at the edge of the firelight had stopped being a competitor and started being somebody's. And when the man and the woman in that grave died, whoever buried them decided the dog belonged in there too. We should be honest that we can't read minds from bones. Some researchers argue we project too much onto finds like this, and they have a point. But you don't have to guess at emotion to see the fact. The care happened. It's written in the teeth. That's not interpretation, that's enamel. So what did we actually get out of it? More than almost anything else we ever made. We got centuries. A camp with dogs cannot be approached silently at night, and for a species that spent hundreds of thousands of years sleeping in the open, that alone was enormous. We got hunting partners with a nose roughly 10,000 times more sensitive than ours, animals that could track a wounded deer we'd have lost in the first 100 meters. We got warmth. We got animals that could carry loads and later pull them. We got an alarm system, a cleaning crew for the camp, and eventually a way to control other animals, which made herding possible, which made everything after that possible. But the biggest thing wasn't practical at all. Somewhere out there in the dark, tens of thousands of years ago, our species did something no species had ever done. We formed a working alliance with a completely different animal. Not by capturing it, not by breaking it, by meeting it halfway over hundreds of generations until neither side could remember being separate. Every domesticated animal on Earth, every cow, every horse, every sheep, came after that. The dog was the proof that it could be done at all. And it started with a wolf that was slightly less afraid than the others, creeping toward a fire it should have run from. Tonight, somewhere in your house or your street, one of that wolf's descendants is asleep on a floor, in a building, surrounded by the species that used to hunt it. And when it wakes up and looks at you, it will pull an eyebrow muscle that its ancestors never had. And something in you will answer. That took 14,000 years to build. Try not to take it for granted.